Well, aside from the fact that this one is constantly looking directly at me, I don't really see a difference here. It is an impeccable likeness. Bury the Brick plushies, now available at the link down below. Okay, hey everybody, Teching 101 here, and today we are continuing the Gotei 13 Lieutenant series. That's right, we took a little bit of a break there from that, but in 2021 we're going to finish that up, and we are starting off with the 10th Squad Division Lieutenant. That's right, the 10th Squad Division Lieutenant, Rangiku Matsumoto. This is going to be a big one. Okay, if I was going to rank the lieutenants, and I'm not going to do every single one, but if I was going to rank the lieutenants based on their prominence in the story, like how often they her, and Shuhei, well, Shuhei tried. He at least tried. He has the foreground in the poster, but yeah, don't worry though. Shuhei is a shoo-in for the number 4 spot, 4th place. I don't know exactly what medal you get after bronze, but he gets it, definitely, because especially when you get to the Thousand Year Blood War arc, Shuhei, at least in the context of the manga, doesn't really do much. He just kind of falls off there. But if you're counting light novels, obviously he's a lot more prominent, because he's basically the main... Don't worry, Shuhei got the main character slot in Can't Fear Your Own World, right? But if we're just talking about the manga material, I would go Renji, then Rangiku, then Izuru, then Shuhei, and then everybody else is in there, and probably Chojuro or Iba would probably be on the very bottom there. But at any rate, yes, so Rangiku, okay, not only is she Toshiro's lieutenant, but she's also the lieutenant, or was the lieutenant under Isshin Shiba, back in the flashback and everything. Remember that popular theory? It was a thing that was around for years, before we really understood what the whole deal with Masaki was and everything, and like how Isshin and Masaki met. There was a theory that Masaki and Rangiku, because they look a little bit similar, that Rangiku's got to be like the spirit of Ichigo's mom, or something like that. And of course, the timelines don't make any sense with that, but it was an interesting fan theory that was out there for a little while. I don't know if it was ever, like, explained or mentioned in a light novel at some point, because they do look kind of similar, but it might have just been Kubo's drawing style there. He just chose to draw them very similar there. But of course, we know that, you know, Rangiku was the lieutenant under Isshin, and then after Isshin went to the world of living, and, you know, Masaki was there already alive, and so, you know, that's how everything happened there, and then Ichigo was eventually born, right? Eventually Toshiro. Toshiro was, I believe, the 3rd seat of the 10th Division back during Isshin's time, and he was still the person that was doing all of the paperwork and everything, so Isshin would basically just laze around and do whatever. Rangiku would be constantly chasing after him, but every now and then she would also be lazing around and drinking sake or whatever, so it was like Toshiro, the 3rd seat, handling all of the paperwork and everything. And I remember there was that one scene when Isshin was like praising him. He's like, "Oh, Toshiro, you're a shoo-in to be captain someday," and Toshiro's just like, yeah, I know, my Bankai training's doing really well. Give it a couple years, I should probably be able to pass you up, you know? And so, they're dynamic. Toshiro and Rangiku's dynamic. It's something that's very funny. It leads to a lot of comedic moments in Bleach. Let's just get this out of the way first, okay? Because Rangiku in Bleach is a very prominent fan service character, and just like when I did Nami's video years ago for the Straw Hats, I said that yes, Nami is a fan service character, you know, especially after the time skip with, you know, Oda making her bust size bigger and everything. Oh, okay, well, boobs. Okay, there's that. And then later on, Rangiku showed up, and I was like, oh, more boobs. Okay, cool. I think I like this. Yeah. So, probably one of the first, you know, drop-dead sexy anime ladies that I ever really experienced growing up. Yeah, so there's that, of course, and there's a lot of jokes involving her boobs throughout the story. Remember, my favorite is the scene when, during the Arrancar arc, they go to the world of the living, and she's just wearing, like, the Karakura, you know, high school uniform, just unbuttoned, right? And then there's that scene where Keigo walks in and almost, like, passes out. You know, he just, like, goes into shock almost from seeing her boobs. So that was a funny scene, right? And then there's the scene where, I think this was a scene in the last scene of the Bleach anime. So remember that? The end of the Bleach anime, where I think it's last moment, the ending theme cues up, and, you know, it's the scenes all over the Soul Society and where everybody's at after the Fullbringer arc, because that's where the anime ended. And the last scene we see with Rangiku and Toshiro is, of course, Rangiku, like, bouncing up to Toshiro and hitting him in the back of the head with her boobs and knocking him over. That's also a scene that happened with Yoruichi and Byakuya once, so Kubo really likes that kind of gag. But yes, she does have large boobs. Okay, we addressed that early on, so it wasn't later. Now I can spend the rest of this talking about her character and her Zanpakuto and her backstory and everything like that. Also, such a coincidence they decided to put the Bleach logo right there, right? I mean, I can't think of anywhere else on here they could have put that in a better place, or a more auspicious spot. Okay, so Rangiku has a rather troubled past, we later find out. And it's actually cool, because I was going through these manga books right here, and so she's on the cover of Volume 46 of the Tankobon, and look who's on the cover of Volume 47. I wonder if that was done intentionally as well. Okay. So her backstory involves Gin Ichimaru, okay? We don't know exactly the whole deal, but they grew up in Rukongai, and we know how it is in Rukongai, especially in the higher digits of, you know, that district. The living conditions aren't that good. Rangiku and Gin basically were orphans. They didn't really have anybody taking care of them. They're obviously not from a noble family or anything like that. So they basically just found each other as kids and just lived together in an old shack out in the middle of the Rukongai, and they were childhood friends. Of course, Gin was a prodigy. Rangiku also had a latent, very strong spiritual energy. We'll get to that in a second. I know there's a lot of people out there right now that are like, do you know what happens in Can't For Your Own World? Do you know what we find out involving Rangiku? I know that. I haven't read that part yet, but I did research and I know what it is, so I'll at least bring it up later, right? And even when they were kids, though, Rangiku never really understood Gin. Gin was, even at that age, very duplicitous, very, you know, he had his plans. He had his master plans involved, okay? That plan that culminated in him trying to eliminate Aizen, that was something that started, you know, over 100 years ago, okay? He had that plan for a long time. Gin was such a schemer, he knew that it's like, I'm gonna get into Aizen's good graces, you know, 100 years ago during Turn Back the Pendulum, or a little bit before that, and he's like, if I'm gonna ever have a chance to have him drop his guard, and so I'm gonna have a moment to kill him, it's probably gonna take at least a century of dedicated service to get to that point, and so that's what Gin did. So every now and then, Gin would just leave. You know, Rangiku and him lived together, but every now and then she would just wake up in the snow, and he would just be gone for days, or weeks, or months, or hey, they're Shinigami, maybe years on end before he would show back up again, right? But, you know, she just kind of let it happen. It's just like, okay, well, this is the only person I really had growing up. Eventually, she joined the Reijutsu Academy, and she became a Shinigami in her own right, and then Gin was there and everything, so that kind of connected the dots. But it's a very complex relationship that the two of them had. Many people have thrown it like they were, like, you know, she was romantically involved with him, or at least had feelings for him, or something along those lines. I don't know. I don't know how that really exactly goes, especially when they were kids, but now that they're older, maybe that there is something there, or at least Rangiku. But it might have just been a thing where it's like they only had each other growing up, and then Gin left, and then Rangiku was kind of on her own. There was also a moment that we see in flashbacks, and it's a little bit cryptic. It is explained more in the Can't For Your Own World, where a bunch of Aizen's followers are going around the Soul Society, apparently, like, taking, like, the way that it was implied was they're taking various Shinigamis, like Ryatsu's or something from various Shinigami, and giving it to Aizen, and Aizen was using that in order to feed the Hogyoku, like his original Hogyoku. Remember, Aizen created the Hogyoku first. He at least arrived at the conclusion to the Hogyoku first before Uehara, but it wasn't as perfected as Uehara, and I believe the way Aizen described it was, in order for evolution to occur, you have to have something else to, like, put that fear, so you have to evolve, okay? So it's like he had a Hogyoku, but it was the existence of Uehara's that allowed it to evolve even further. Something like that. It's a little bit cryptic and a little bit hard to understand, but that was basically the gist of it. And from what we see in the manga, we just see a scene of Rangiku lying unconscious, and then, you know, Aizen receives this something from Rangiku, and then puts it into the Hogyoku, and we just assume, like, oh, well, maybe it's because Rangiku had very high, latent, you know, spiritual pressure, just like Gin, just a lot of other, like, prodigies growing up, and that's what Aizen wanted, and, you know, put it into the Hogyoku. Later on, during Can't For Your Own World, where it isn't just, like, you know how Pernita was the left arm of the Soul King, the Mimi Hage was the right arm, Herald Valkyrie was the heart of the Soul King? Well, there's fragments of the Soul King just kind of all over the place, and they can exist within souls, like Rangiku, or they can exist within humans, like Ginjo and Aurora, and that's a character that you would only know if you read Can't For Your Own World. But there's a bunch of people kind of scattered all throughout the Soul Society and the living world that have parts of the Soul King inside of them, right? And that's also a more in-depth explanation from where Fullbring comes from. The Fullbring explanation we get in the manga, the one that Ginjo gives Ichigo, Ichigo is very simple. It's just like, oh, okay, so here's how it works. You know, when our mothers were attacked by hollows before we were born, when they were pregnant with us, you know, that hollow Reiatsu got into them and then mixed with us in utero, and then we were born as Fullbringers. Okay, so that's the origin there. That's not exactly wrong, but there's just a little bit more to it there that involves fragments of the Soul King kind of floating around kind of everywhere throughout the whole dimensions. I don't believe it's just the Soul Society and the Living World. I believe Hueco is involved in this too, because it's all part of like the same balance of the realms and everything, right? So, Rangiku has the nail or the claw of the Soul King inside of her, just like Harold was the heart. I believe Aurora was the chain of the Soul King. So we don't exactly know, I think, what that entails, really. I don't think, like my research was kind of limited here, but it was basically the claw or the nail of the Soul King that Rangiku had, and that was what Aizen wanted, and took that from her, or his followers took that from her, and then he put it in the Hogyoku, and that increased its power, and, like, you know, allowed it to evolve even further, closer to the ideal version that he wanted, okay? And so that's a little bit more of the story there, but like I said, I have not read that part of the story yet in Can't Fear Your Own World, so my knowledge of that is just limited to some stuff I found online. But yes, Rangiku did have a fragment of the Soul King inside of her, and that also explains something that Gin said a few times to Rangiku, like, Gin is always looking for the thing that she lost. I believe that's one of the last things that Gin says to Rangiku before he dies, is, I'm sorry I couldn't get it back. I'm sorry, I tried to get it back for you, but I couldn't. That makes the whole scene with Gin going after Aizen, using the kill him, Kamishini no Yari, taking the Hogyoku, because the Hogyoku is where that part of the Soul King that was originally from Rangiku is in. So that makes a whole new, like, when you learn about that in the light novels, it's a whole new dimension to what that really meant. Alright, you know, why Gin was going after Aizen, why did he want the Hogyoku, right? You could just say, oh, it was because Gin wanted to usurp the power for himself. Gin wanted the Hogyoku to be the ruler or anything like that. Or you could look at it like Gin was just a good person that just didn't want Aizen to have that power. But no, it's kind of a combination of both of that. Gin definitely did not want Aizen to have that power, and he wanted to help Rangiku out. And so Rangiku shows up at the very tail end of the Fate Karakura Town arc. She's injured as well. She got a big part of her ripped out by Aion, you know, and so she's still bleeding and she's injured. But she shows up in the Soul Society at the very end to kind of, like, you know, cradle Gin before he just gets obliterated by Aizen. And I don't even know if that line that I said, like, I'm sorry I couldn't get it back for you, I don't think he even says that. I think that he's just so weak at that point. I think it might have just been like an internal thing that he was thinking of. Same thing that happens when Ichigo finally arrives, and that's right before Gin dies, right before the life fades out of him. He looks over at Ichigo and he just thinks to himself, he sees Ichigo's eyes and says, okay, those eyes are stronger than what they were before. Those eyes have more confidence. He can do this. I failed, I'm gonna die, but he's going to be the one to defeat Aizen, okay? And I think, yeah, just Gin's just thinking that to himself there, right? And so that's a very, when you learn about that backstory and just a little bit more from, you know, she's the sexy, you know, fan service character that drinks a lot of sake and jokes around a lot. She's very bubbly personality, very much like Orihime. But Orihime has struggles that she has to burden as well, and she just doesn't tell people about them, right? And so that's the kind of similar personality they have. There was the scene where, this involves also Rangiku being naked, but there was the scene in the Arrancar arc when Rangiku and Toshiro are staying with Orihime. Toshiro just decides to stay on the roof because he's kind of like the brooding anime protagonist up there on the roof. But then Rangiku's taking a bath, and Orihime's all bandaged up from the fight with Yami and Ukiura and everything. And so she finally starts crying and letting it all out and just being like, I just don't know what to do with Ichigo and everything. Oh my god. And then Rangiku just gets out of the bath completely naked and just like hugs her and like tickles her, and she's just like, hey, you don't worry about it, okay? You know, you're putting too much on yourself, you know, you're shouldering too many burdens. This is coming from Rangiku, who knows all too well exactly the exact same kind of stuff that Orihime is dealing with, maybe just on a little bit of a grander scale with, you know, how long she's lived and everything. But yeah, that was a nice little heartwarming scene. And then the Arrancars attack and they all go into battle mode and everything like that there. Oh, speaking of romances though, I gotta bring that up, because I think I kind of forgot to bring that up during Shuhei's video, so I gotta bring it up now. That you could also ship Rangiku and Shuhei, because Shuhei definitely 100% has a crush on Rangiku. That was definitely explained during a lot of the anime episodes and like a supplemental material, so he definitely has a crush on Rangiku. There was the scene, it was a filler, but there was the scene where they go on a mission together out in Rukongai, and of course, because it's anime, they gotta stop over at a hotel with a hot spring and a bath and everything. You gotta have a scene like that, of course. So, yeah, I would be remiss if I forgot to, because I don't think I brought that up in Shuhei's video, but Rangiku x Shuhei? I don't know. Okay. So, let's talk about her Zanpakuto. Let's do that. Okay, so Hineko, Ash Cat. Very simple ability that has just a lot of capabilities here, okay? So her release command is Growl, Hineko. We first see that ability when she was fighting against Izuru very briefly. It's honestly one of the perfect counters for Izuru's Wabisuke. Izuru's Wabisuke, of course, has the ability to increase the weight of anything that it cuts, whereas Rangiku, you know, the sword is getting heavier. She just releases it, turning the blade into ash. So very similar to Senbon Zakura, just a little bit more refined than Senbon Zakura, because Senbon Zakura breaks up Byakuya's Zanpakuto into little fragments, little razor blades that are... The canon explanation we get for it is that they're really tiny blades, and when the light catches them, that's what gives them the appearance of cherry blossoms falling. But in the anime, they like glow incandescent, like neon pink. So it's implied the blades are a little bit bigger, but that is the explanation that we get. But with Rangiku, it's even more refined. It's like literally ash, and it's like a powder that she uses. So she basically has an ash cloud all around her, and then she can either send that at the opponent and wrap them around in the ash, and they get shredded up that way. You know, wrap them in like a dome of ash to trap them so they can't escape without, you know, getting cut. She does this with the Tres Bestia, Haribel's Fraction. She kind of creates like a tornado out of ash and makes like a primitive, you know, ash cat, which is something that, you know, Byakuya really couldn't do. I mean, I guess he could do, but that's not really typically how he fights. But, you know, Rangiku is a little bit more clever with how she has to make this work. So obscure the vision with Hineko, and then when the enemy breaks out, if they do manage to break out, they get cut, and then Momo, I think, set up the Ryatsu net all over the battlefield, and then that's a cool little combo move they had there, right? Also, considering it's made out of ash, and I mean, it would probably not be beneficial to do this, because the main draw of this ability is that you can spread out your sword kind of all over the battlefield, and you can make various things, but kind of the same deal with Senbon Zakura. If Rangiku really wanted to, she could make a spear, or an axe, or a bow and arrow, like something out of ash, and fire it at the opponent. Maybe that just takes a little bit more skill, a little bit more refinement. Hey, look at it this way. Byakuya ended up doing that against Asnote during the last arc, but that was something that took him a while to figure out. I mean, he was this genius, and it wasn't until he went to go train with the Zero Squad, and he kind of stepped back a bit, and he kind of like looked at Senbon Zakura, like what it was really capable of, that he was able to mold it into all these interesting shapes, and he, like the spikes and stuff he used to fight against Az. So Rangiku taking a while to learn that kind of refinement as well, that's probably going to take a little bit more time if it took that long for Byakuya to do it. But sure, I could see Rangiku molding Hineko, like fighting against, you know, an enemy with Hineko and everything. It's kind of like offense and defense, like the perfect combination there, because you can raise up the ash cloud to block an attack, and then kind of like Katara waterbending. It's not water exactly, it's a powder. Kind of sandbending then. Sandbending, not something we see quite a bit in Avatar, but it's there. Kind of similar to that. So you can like raise it up as like a sand or an ash shield, block the attack, or at least cushion the attack. You know, if it's a sword or if it's a bludgeoning attack, probably best if it's like a giant fist or something, she can just, you know, impact that, you know, like disperse the shockwaves, and then take the remainder of the ash and like spin it around to like attack the enemy head on or something. So there's a lot of stuff you can really do with that, but she could also maybe make spears or javelins or something out of the ash, solidified, solid, and then just, you know, wish him at the opponent or something like that. That would be definitely something that I could see her doing. Even in the light novels or anything, I don't believe we ever find out about her Bankai in the story, but I would imagine it might probably be similar to Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi. I mean, don't fix what's not broken, really. Her Shikai creates a little bit of an ash cloud in order for her to fight, so just like how with Senbon Zakura, it goes from 1,000 blades to hundreds of millions of blades in the Bankai, Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi, Hineko's Bankai would just be like like, the 9 lives of the ash cat, and then it summons like 9 giant orbs of just like ash, and then she uses those to fight, and she can either throw them at the opponent in like a giant form, and then like when it hits you, it just like is a torrent of like really, really, really tiny razor blades that just cut you to pieces, and they're whirling, especially if they're like, you know, rotating or something. She could just throw those at the opponent, or she could just summon so much ash, and it's very similar to Toshiro's in this regard. Toshiro, being her captain, has the ability to control the weather with Yorimaru. That would be something really similar. As the lieutenant, she makes so much ash, it literally blacks out the sky. It like covers the sky. It gets dimmer when she goes into her Bankai, and you're like, what's going on with your Bankai? And it's like, oh, the sky literally turned to ash, and then it rains down on you, similar to Hyorimaru and his, like, you know, Toshiro's, like, ice and snow abilities, but with ash there, right? And as a combo attack, it would work great, you know, combining the ice with the ash. Kind of like how when a volcano erupts, and then the ash rains down on, like, the countryside and everything, there'd be something similar to that attack, and that would be pretty cool, too. So, very, very versatile Zanpakuto that she has. Heineko, during the Zanpakuto arc, takes the form of a sexy cat lady. So, yeah, sexy cat lady, and there's a few more fan service moments there, of course, because sexy cat lady. I mean, it's anime, what do you want, right? Okay, it's a ash cat, where else could you have taken it, right? Okay, so that was pretty cool there. They have some nice moments together during the Zanpakuto filler. I love the scene in the last arc. By the way, she cuts her hair in the last arc too, which I find much more, I like the short hair I think is cuter on her. I think it really just doesn't work. And she also has like a little beauty mark, which I kind of have one too, so there you go. But at any rate, during the last arc, when Toshiro loses his Bankai to Kangdu. I was gonna say Asnope, and I'm like, no, not Az. Bambieto was Komamura. Kangdu! I remember Kangdu! Yeah, he doesn't get to do much, but he's there. He's certainly there. You gotta give him that much. Okay, so Kangdu steals his Bankai. So, you know what Toshiro does? Toshiro goes back to the drawing board a little bit. A lot of the other captains did that too. Like Soifone, Komamura kind of went to his grandfather out in the cave to get like the secret technique to awaken, and Byakuya went to the Soul Palace, of course. But Toshiro goes back to the drawing board. And he's a very tactical guy, and he's thinking of everything that he has in his arsenal, and he's like, all right, well, not only the ice and snow for my Shikai, because that's not really good enough, I also have my subordinates, the people in my division that want to help me, right? And so, that would have been kind of a funny scene where Toshiro going up to Rangiku, and I could kind of imagine that, like, Toshiro's like, hey, Matsumoto, you know, I need you to help me perfect a new technique with Yorimaru. Let's go train. And I can imagine Rangiku just being like, you need my help with something? It's like, no, the Quincy's are going to attack, Rangiku. We have to train. Aw, you need my help. That's so adorable. Okay, let's go. I'm like, should I pack a lunch? Damn it, just come on. Let's go. He's like, Toshiro's getting all flustered and stuff. So they train, and what they come up with is ingenious. I love this. It was the vacuum ice barrier. Remember that? Okay, I love this. So what they do is they're going up against Bazby first during the second invasion, okay? And Bazby, of course, is the heat. So he's got his, you know, Burner Finger 1, Burner Finger 2. He's got all these techniques. And, of course, Toshiro has the power of ice, which in his Bankai, with all of his crazy powers, might be able to, you know, quell his heat. But the Shikai is just not going to be powerful enough. Okay, so what they do is they create like a crystalline ice box structure, a wall made of ice. And Heineko is a special technique called House, where Rangiku takes Heineko and fills the gaps in between the ice with ash. And then after the structure is, you know, finished with multiple layers of just ice, ash, separating them like little compartments, Rangiku extracts the ash from the compartments, and then Toshiro immediately seals it back up with the ice, creating layer after layer of a vacuum with no air, because the ash was there and the ash is removed, okay? Now, of course, I mean, like, you know, you could look at it from a science perspective, like, is that feasible? I'm not really sure. Anime, Reiatsu, Zanpakuto magic sword power. There you go, okay? Point is, they create a vacuum ice wall, which is a really cool sentence to say, right? Vacuum ice wall. And so, when Bazby looks at Toshiro and is like, oh, that weak-ass ice shield's not going to be able to stop my heat! Bam! Fire Fist blasts right through. It melts the first layer of ice, but then hits that vacuum and the flames immediately die because there's no oxygen there. So the flame immediately dies, and then Toshiro has another ice layer underneath it, right? And so that was how they fought. Now, there was also a vacuum ice blade that he did with the same basic premise, basically making an ice, like, spear or shard, like a giant ice shard, and the same premise with the Hineko inside of it, and then removed, and then the vacuum, and then it strikes Bazby, so Bazby can't use his fire to melt it, because the fire will immediately like die because of the, the lack of oxygen or whatever. Now, of course, this is not strong enough to defeat Bazby. At the end of the day, I think they only had a month or so to plan this, if less than that. So, they went back to the drawing board and they gave it their best shot, Rangiku and Toshiro working together and everything. But at the end of the day, Bazby, he is the heat, and he's one of the strongest Sternritter that we've seen in the lower guard. And so you're not going to be able to beat him with just an impromptu ability you put together. It was an interesting trick, and Rangiku and Toshiro did their best, and Bazby was definitely surprised when he first tried to attack them and it didn't work, but he figured out the trick pretty quickly, and he's just like, okay, well, it's not gonna work. That's not strong enough to kill me. Even if you hit me head on with those vacuum blades, that's not gonna kill me, but good effort. You tried, right? You tried, and I like the way that they came up with that, Kubo coming up with that idea. That was pretty sweet there. That was pretty cool, right? Let's see. During Fei Karakura, as I mentioned, she teamed up with Momo to fight against the Tres Bestias, and did manage to succeed in terms of defeating them, and then Aion showed up, and that kind of threw a wrench into things, right? And when Aion was awoke, the first thing that he did was just completely, like, dominate Rangiku and Iba and Shuhei. Like, it wasn't even a contest, really, right? And so Rangiku, for most of that arc, spends it on the ground being healed, and then right at the very end, she gets back up and she goes to the Soul Society. She meets Ichigo's friends very quick. I always remember that scene when Tatsuki sees her, and, Rangiku's like, you need to get out of here, you need to get away, and, Tatsuki is like, is that one of Ichigo's friends? She's gorgeous, she's beautiful, she has a Shihakusho just like Ichigo, and that was more than anything, I think, just of Tatsuki lamenting the fact that Ichigo is one of her closest friends, and Ichigo has not said anything about this other world he was part of. Maybe because, Ichigo was afraid they wouldn't understand or what. That was an aspect of the series, like, I understand that even when I was reading the Deicide chapters, we go from Aizen evolving into this god figure, going to the Soul Society to kill the freaking Soul King or whatever, and then we cut to Ichigo's friends just running around town. I can understand that's kind of like, like anticlimactic. It's just like, okay, great, Ichigo's friends are running around, Danganronji's back, that's cool. Can we get back to Ichigo, like, fighting Aizen? I understand, but I think it's something that I think Kubo definitely wanted to pay more attention to in the story, of the whole dynamic between Ichigo and the rift that is created between him and his friends, because he is now a substitute Shinigami, and he doesn't want to tell his friends anything about what's going on in his life. And so that was a scene I think Kubo fit as much as he could in that one moment, where Tatsuki was looking at Rangiku and just talking about, like, Ichigo, you son of a, you should tell us about what's going on in your life, that you knew somebody like this, and that you knew, like, everything else in your world is going on, and we just don't know about it, and we were supposed to be your friends, you know what I mean? So, yeah, there was a really good scene with that. And that leads into Rangiku's moment with Gin and everything, and then Gin pretty much dies in Rangiku's arms. Yeah, it's something that, like, often you see Rangiku hanging out in her house or at a bar somewhere, just kind of, like, drinking sake. She is quite a heavy drinker. And then, she'll just be sitting there and just kind of lamenting what's going on. And she has moments like that when she's by herself, when she's alone, and she doesn't have to put on the bubbly personality whenever anyone's around her, like Toshiro or anybody. She can have a very serious, like, look into her life, and, like after Izuru's fight, too, like what happened with Izuru and being manipulated by Gin. So, like, after that fight, Rangiku's like, Izuru, you're doing this because of Gin. Gin, what did you say to Izuru? What are you doing right now? And now you've defected. On the Sokyoku Hill, Shuhei was the one that held a sword at Tozen's neck, and Rangiku was the one that grabbed Gin's arm and like held a sword to his neck. He just leaves, and then later on, Rangiku's just thinking to herself like, "Oh my god!" And then Toshiro shows up. I think that was the scene where Toshiro shows up right behind her. Is like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And she's like, "Ah!" And then boob joke, boob bounce. So that's of course there. It's a little bit of a juxtaposition Kubo likes to do with that really serious, introspective onto Rangiku's life, thinking about her past with Gin and her fight with Izuru, and just thinking that boobs. It's like that's yeah. So yeah, and also Izuru does come to apologize to Rangiku later for everything. I'm like, I'm sorry, I've drew my Zanpakuto, released my Shikai, tried to defeat you. Rangiku's like, not a big deal. I fought you too. I fought back and everything. So yeah, that's just how it is. It's cool. We're no one expected this to happen. Gin and Tozen and everybody defecting. So we're cool, right? But yeah, I wish, like I said, I wish I would have read more of this. I just did the research on the internet and everything. So there might be some more stuff in the Camp for Your Own World about Rangiku. So let me know in the description down below, amongst all else. We didn't get a lot of look into how her dynamic with Isshin was, beyond just like he was a little pervy, and so he was like constantly, I think, hitting on her a lot. Just like after, Rangiku was running around, nice! And then Rangiku just like punches him in the face and walks away. So yeah, there's some comedic moments there with her and Isshin, but we don't get to see them too much. I would have loved that. I would have loved to see, because we don't get to see it in the canon of the story that much, Toshiro and Rangiku just sitting around and talking about Isshin. Like, I'm sure they do that every now and then, right? They just sit around in the barracks, filling out paperwork or whatever. Toshiro's working, Rangiku's sitting on the couch drinking and just looking out the window, and maybe it's a rainy day in the Soul Society and they're just in the office, and Rangiku's like, "Hey, Captain." "What? I'm busy." "What do you think happened to Isshin?" I'm like, "I don't know, Rangiku." And just like, it's like maybe a moment between the two of them or something like that. Like, do you think he was happy? I'm like, something like that would have been cool to see, right? Like a little dynamic, because they care about each other. It's just that Toshiro is very much annoyed by aspects of her personality, like the slacking off and everything like that. But obviously he respects her as a soldier and as his lieutenant. Like, Toshiro would have no one else as his lieutenant other than Rangiku. And there was also the backstory with Toshiro, with Rangiku as well. Rangiku was kind of the one that, got Toshiro involved with the Gotei. This was something I think I addressed when I did Toshiro's own video. But the way that basically went was Toshiro was a kid living in Rukongai. I think he was living in one of the higher districts, though. He was living in like District 1 or 2. He was in one of the more prestigious districts, and he lived with his grandmother. And when Toshiro began to awaken his Ryatsu and his ice powers and everything, it began to get really, really cold in his house, and it began to negatively infect his grandmother's health, and so she lost a lot of weight, and Toshiro didn't know what was going on. He just thought she was sick. And then one day when Toshiro went out to go grab some food at the store, he ran into Rangiku's boobs, of course, and then gets knocked down, and Toshiro's like, "What's going on?" And Rangiku's like, "Get up!" And just like, and then later Rangiku shows up at his house, and like, it's your latent power that's affecting her. If you manage to put some distance between you and her, then her condition would undoubtedly improve. It's you that's doing this, but it's okay. It just means that you have a lot of power and that you would make a splendid Shinigami. So you should come with me to the academy so you can learn how to, master these powers and restrain them, because you really are like a prodigy. And then Toshiro went with Rangiku, and then that's how he got involved with everything and how he became a captain. So it's really Rangiku that led him down that path and kind of saved. I don't know it's ever been explained what happened with Toshiro's grandma, but I like to think that there was a happy ending there. At least I hope there is a happy ending where Toshiro had to leave, learn to master his powers, and then came back a few years later when he has better control and his grandmother was still alive and in better health, and put some weight back on and everything because of, so I'm just gonna go with that, a happy ending there for Toshiro and his grandma. But at any rate, thank you guys for watching the video. This was a lot of fun to do. Obviously, Rangiku, one of the more prominent ones in the story. So who are we talking about next, I wonder? There's only so long I can use this method, because eventually I'm just going to be, pointing to lieutenants I've already done. But let's say right here. Okay, that's Isane. That's definitely Isane. Okay, so next time we're going to be talking about the lieutenant of the 4th Division, now the current captain of the 4th Division, the medical division of Healing Kido, or Kaido, Isane Kotetsu. So catch it back here next time, and yeah, right, Barry the first, Barry Zero, Barry the original. Is it Alpha Barry, Barry Omega, or Barry Zero? I'm kind of throwing out different ideas for the original Barry here. And then Barry 1. So there we go. Okay, well, links for that, of course, is found below. Thanks for watching, everybody. Tekking, Barry, signing out.